You don't belong here. Beatrice Lowell's voice cut through the golden glow of the Sterling Room, Boston's bastion of elite dining. Her sneer targeted Amara Sterling, a black woman seated alone, her indigo silk dress gleaming defiantly. This is legacy, not some trendy spot for people like you, Beatrice spat, her words dripping with disdain. Amara's calm reply, I know a place's worth, ignited Beatrice's rage. A humiliating slap echoed. Stunning diners. Gasps rippled as Beatrice demanded Amara's removal. But Mr. Abernathy, the veteran manager, bowed to Amara. Miss Sterling, your orders? Beatrice froze. Amara rose, voice icy. This was once your family's name. She was the new owner. Power shifted, jaws dropped. What's your guess for this tale's end? Subscribe, share where and when you're listening. Will Amara reshape this legacy? Stay to find out. The Sterling Room exhaled history with every flicker of its crystal chandeliers, their golden light bathing the mahogany-paneled walls in a glow that whispered of Boston's elite. Tables draped in starched linen bore the weight of whispered deals and clinking crystal, while the air carried the faint scent of aged wine and rosemary. Above the central fireplace, a stern portrait of Cornelius Lowell, the restaurant's founder, glared down, his eyes seeming to guard a legacy carved over a century. Waiters in crisp vests glided silently, serving plates of seared scallops and braised lamb to diners who wore their wealth as subtly as their tailored suits. Amara Sterling sat at a corner table, her indigo silk dress a quiet rebellion against the room's muted elegance. Her fingers traced the edge of a crystal water glass, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the space like a general surveying a battlefield. As the founder of Sterling Hospitality Group, she had built a chain of boutique hotels that redefined luxury, open, inclusive, vibrant. This restaurant, the Sterling Room, was her latest conquest, acquired in a secret deal finalized at dawn. The irony of her surname matching the restaurant's was not lost on her. It felt like fate, a chance to reshape a relic of exclusivity into something new. Yet as she glanced at Cornelius Lowell's portrait, his painted gaze seemed to challenge her presence, as if whispering, "Who are you to claim this?" Amara's lips curved faintly. She wasn't here to dine. She was here to own. Across the room, Beatrice Lowell stood behind the polished host stand, her posture rigid as she surveyed her domain. The Sterling Room was more than a restaurant to her. It was her birthright, the last bastion of the Lowell family's fading empire. Her father's decision to sell, driven by mounting debts, had gutted her. Beatrice's manicured nails dug into the leather-bound reservation book as she muttered to a waiter, "Ensure table 6 gets the 82 Bordeaux. They're proper guests." Her voice carried a brittle edge, honed by years of upholding tradition in a world that no longer cared. At 45, her ash blonde hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and her tailored blazer screamed old money, but her eyes betrayed a simmering panic. The Sterling Room was slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. Her gaze landed on Amara, and her lips thinned. A black woman, young, poised, sitting alone in her restaurant. It was an affront. Beatrice saw in Amara everything she despised: new wealth, audacity, a world that dared to move on without the Lowells. She whispered to a passing server, "Who let her in here?" The server, a young man named Thomas, shrugged nervously. "She had a reservation, Miss Lowell." Beatrice's scoff was sharp. "A reservation? This isn't a place for newcomers." Her words dripped with the venom of someone clinging to a crumbling pedestal. Amara felt the weight of eyes, not just Beatrice's, but those of other diners. A silver-haired man at a nearby table glanced up from his steak, his brow furrowing as if her presence disrupted the room's unwritten code. A woman in pearls whispered to her companion, their eyes darting toward Amara's table. She was used to this, the subtle scrutiny, the unspoken question of why she was here. Years of navigating boardrooms and hotel lobbies had taught her to wear their stares like armor. But tonight she wasn't just a guest. She was the future. Her acquisition of the Sterling Room was more than a business move. It was a statement. She would tear down the walls of exclusion, starting here under Cornelius Lowell's watchful gaze. Beatrice's heels clicked as she moved through the dining room, her smile a mask for the rage bubbling beneath. She paused at a table of regulars, exchanging pleasantries, but her eyes kept flicking to Amara. The audacity of this woman, sitting so confidently in a space built by her family, was unbearable. Beatrice's father had always said, "The Sterling Room is for those who belong." To her, Amara was an intruder, a symbol of the world's betrayal. She didn't know Amara's name, nor the power she held. All she saw was a threat to everything she'd been raised to protect. Amara sipped her water, her mind racing. She noticed the portrait again, its heavy frame dominating the room. Cornelius Lowell's eyes seemed to follow her, a silent challenge to her claim. She thought of her journey, daughter of immigrants, clawing her way through a world that often shut her out. The Sterling Room wasn't just a prize, it was a battleground. She'd faced rooms like this before, filled with whispers and walls. But tonight, she held the deed. Tonight, she would begin to rewrite her story. As Beatrice approached another table, her voice carried across the room, sharp and deliberate. "We maintain standards here," she said loudly, her words aimed at Amara, though her eyes stayed on the guests. The air tightened, diners shifting in their seats. Amara's jaw clenched, but she held her gaze steady. The confrontation was coming. She could feel it, like static before a storm. Beatrice was a spark, and Amara was ready to ignite. The Sterling Room hummed with the clink of silverware and murmured conversations, but beneath its polished surface, a current of unease crackled. Amara Sterling sat poised at her corner table, her indigo dress catching the chandelier's glow, like a beacon in the sea of muted linens. Her fingers rested lightly on the stem of her glass, but her eyes were alert, catching every glance that lingered too long. She felt the weight of the room, diners in tailored suits and pearl necklaces, their stares a mix of curiosity and judgment. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell loomed above, its presence a silent reminder of the legacy she was here to dismantle. Amara had faced rooms like this before, their air thick with unspoken rules, but tonight she was no mere guest. She was the architect of change. Beatrice Lowell stood at the host stand, her posture stiff as if braced against an invisible storm. Her ash-blonde chignon gleamed under the lights, but her eyes burned with a fury she barely concealed. Amara's presence gnawed at her, a splinter in the carefully curated world of the Sterling Room. She remembered her father's voice, gravelly and firm, from years ago. "Beatrice, this place is only for those who belong. Guard it with your life." She was 12 then, standing in this very dining room, watching him charm senators and bankers. The memory stung now, twisted by his betrayal, selling their legacy to cover debts he'd hidden from her. Beatrice's nails pressed into her palms. She would not let an outsider, especially one so brazenly confident, tarnish what was hers. Amara sensed the hostility radiating from Beatrice. She'd known this scrutiny her whole life. Boardrooms, galas, even her hotels where her success was met with raised brows and whispered doubts. But she'd learned to wield their skepticism like a blade, sharpening her resolve. Tonight, as the new owner of the Sterling Room, she carried a secret that made every stare irrelevant. Still, the room's judgment pressed in. A woman at a nearby table, her diamond earrings glinting, leaned toward her companion, murmuring, "Who is she?" The man shrugged, but his eyes lingered on Amara, assessing. She met his gaze briefly, unflinching, then returned to her thoughts. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a fortress, and she was here to breach its walls. Beatrice moved through the dining room, her heels clicking like a metronome. She paused to greet a couple at table 8, her smile practiced but brittle. "Everything to your liking, Mr. Harrington?" she asked, her voice syrupy, but her attention kept drifting to Amara, who sat with an ease that felt like defiance. Beatrice's father had taught her to read people, to spot those who didn't fit. Amara, with her poised elegance and unapologetic presence, was a glaring anomaly. Beatrice's mind flashed to another memory. Her father, years later, slouched in his study, confessing the debts. "We have no choice, Beatrice," he'd said. "The Sterling Room must go." She'd vowed then to fight for it, to preserve the Lowell name. This woman, this stranger, was the embodiment of that loss. Finally, Beatrice could stand it no longer. She approached Amara's table, her movements deliberate, like a predator circling prey. The diners nearby grew quieter, sensing the shift in the air. Amara looked up, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, ready. Beatrice's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid you've mistaken this place for something else," she said, her voice low but cutting. "The Sterling Room is a legacy, not some trendy spot for newcomers. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." Amara's gaze held steady, her voice even. "I'm quite comfortable here. I understand the value of a place like this." Her words were polite, but their weight landed like a challenge. A few diners turned, their forks pausing midair. The woman with diamond earrings whispered again, her tone sharp with intrigue. Beatrice's smile faltered, her face flushing. "Value?" she scoffed. "You speak as if you belong here. This restaurant is for those who've earned their place, not those who stumble in." Amara leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but unyielding. "I've earned my place in more rooms than you can imagine." The words hung between them, a quiet gauntlet thrown down. Beatrice's hand twitched, her composure fraying. The memory of her father's words echoed again. "Only for those who belong." To her, Amara was an insult to that creed, a threat to the world she'd been raised to protect. The dining room seemed to hold its breath, the chandelier's light casting long shadows as the two women locked eyes, each refusing to yield. Beatrice's voice dropped to a hiss. "You have no idea what this place means." She turned slightly, addressing the room as much as Amara. "Standards matter here." The diners shifted, some nodding faintly, others averting their eyes. Amara remained still, her calm a stark contrast to Beatrice's rising agitation. The storm was gathering, its edges sharp and inevitable. Neither woman knew the full weight of what was coming, but the air crackled with the promise of a reckoning. The air in the Sterling Room thickened, charged with the unspoken weight of Beatrice Lowell's hissed challenge. Amara Sterling sat unwavering, her indigo dress a stark contrast to the starched linens around her, her eyes locked on Beatrice's trembling form. The diner's murmurs had faded to a tense hush, forks hovering midair as eyes darted between the two women. A woman in pearls clutched her napkin, whispering to her companion, "What's happening?" The man beside her leaned forward, his gaze sharp with curiosity. The chandelier light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the mahogany walls, as if the room itself sensed the storm brewing. Beatrice stood inches from Amara's table, her smile gone, replaced by a sneer that bared her teeth. "You think you can just sit here," she said, her voice low but venomous, "as if you belong? This is the Sterling Room, not some pop-up for people chasing clout." Her words sliced through the silence, deliberate and cruel, each syllable aimed to wound. A few diners gasped softly, their whispers rippling like waves. "She's got nerve," a man in a pinstripe suit muttered, his tone a mix of disdain and intrigue. Amara's expression remained calm, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. She'd heard these barbs before, in boardrooms, at galas, in the subtle slights of those who saw her as an outsider. Each time she'd turn their words into fuel. "I'm here because I choose to be," she said, her voice steady, cutting through Beatrice's venom like a blade. "And I know exactly what this place is worth." The words were simple, but their weight landed like a gauntlet, challenging not just Beatrice but the room's unspoken hierarchy. Beatrice's face reddened, her hands clenching at her sides. "Worth," she spat, stepping closer, her voice rising. "You think you can waltz in here with your audacity and talk about worth? This is my family's legacy. People like you don't get to claim it." The insult hung heavy, its edge sharpened by the room's attention. A young couple at a nearby table exchanged uneasy glances, while an older woman in a velvet dress whispered, "She shouldn't be talking to her like that." The room was a pressure cooker, every eye on the confrontation. Amara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a measured calm that carried more power than Beatrice's outburst. "If your legacy is built on turning people away based on who they are, then it's a legacy that's already crumbling." Her words struck like a match, igniting gas from the diners. The woman in pearls covered her mouth, while the pinstripe-suited man leaned back, his brow raised. Amara's gaze never left Beatrice, her calm a mirror reflecting the older woman's unraveling composure. Beatrice's breath hitched, her eyes wild with fury. She saw her father's face in her mind, his stern voice echoing, "Guard our name, Beatrice." Amara's defiance was a direct assault on that command, a challenge to everything she'd been raised to protect. "You have no right," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "This place is for those with class, with history, not for people like you who think money buys everything." The word "you" was a weapon, loaded with years of prejudice, and the diners felt its sting. A waiter froze mid-step, his tray trembling, as the room's tension coiled tighter. Amara's jaw tightened, but her voice remained unshaken. "Money doesn't buy respect," she said, each word deliberate. "But integrity does. And if your guests are bothered by my skin, that's your failure, not mine." The statement was a blade, cutting through the room's pretense. A young woman at a corner table nodded faintly, her eyes bright with admiration, while an older man muttered, "She's got a point." The diners were no longer just spectators. They were witnesses to a reckoning. Beatrice's face contorted, her composure shattering. She stepped closer, her voice a low growl. "You dare lecture me in my own house?" The word house cracked with desperation, as if she could will the restaurant back into her family's control. Her hands shook, her father's words looping in her mind. Only those who belong. Amara was the opposite of that, a symbol of everything slipping from her grasp. The diners leaned in, their whispers now a low hum, sensing the breaking point. The woman in pearls clutched her companion's arm, her voice barely audible. "This is getting ugly." Amara held her ground, her eyes locked on Beatrice's. "This isn't your house anymore," she said softly, the words a quiet promise of what was to come. Beatrice's breath caught, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. The room seemed to contract, every sound. Clinking glasses, rustling napkins, fading into silence. Beatrice's hand twitched, her control slipping like sand through her fingers. The air was electric, the moment teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Every eye was on them, waiting for the spark that would set the room ablaze. The Sterling room held its breath, the tension from Amara Sterling's defiant words, "This isn't your house anymore," hanging like a storm cloud ready to break. Beatrice Lowell stood frozen, her face a mask of fury, her trembling hand betraying the unraveling of her control. The diners, caught in the spell of the confrontation, sat riveted, forks stilled, eyes wide. The woman in pearls gripped her napkin, her whisper barely audible. "She's gone too far." A young man in a corner booth leaned forward, his gaze flickering with admiration for Amara's unyielding poise. The chandelier light pulsed, casting jagged shadows that seemed to dance with the room's rising pulse. Beatrice's voice cracked like a whip. "You dare lecture me?" she hissed, stepping so close her shadow fell across Amara's table. Her eyes blazed with the weight of her father's words, "Guard our name," now twisted into desperation. Amara, seated in her indigo dress, met her gaze with a calm that burned brighter than Beatrice's rage. "I'm not lecturing," Amara said, her voice low and steady. "I'm stating facts." The words were a spark, and Beatrice was tender. Without warning, Beatrice's hand lashed out. Slap! The sound cut through the silence, sharp and humiliating, a violation that echoed off the mahogany walls. Amara's head turned slightly, her cheeks stinging red, but her eyes never wavered. Gasps erupted. The woman in pearls covered her mouth, horrified, while the young man in the booth clenched his fist, muttering, "That's not right." An older gentleman in a tweed jacket shook his head, his disapproval clear. The room, once a bastion of decorum, was now a stage for raw conflict. Beatrice, panting, pointed a trembling finger. "Get out!" she shouted, her voice shrill. "You don't belong here!" The diners shifted, some nodding faintly in agreement, others exchanging uneasy glances. A waiter, Thomas, hovered nearby, his tray shaking as he looked to the host stand for guidance. But Amara remained still, her silence louder than Beatrice's outburst. Her cheek burned, but her eyes were ice, a dangerous calm that promised something greater than anger. Before Beatrice could speak again, a figure emerged from the shadows of the dining room. Mr. Abernathy, The manager who'd served the Sterling Room for 30 years moved with a quiet authority. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, his face etched with a mix of regret and resolve. "Ms. Lowell," he said, his voice firm but deferential, "please step back." Beatrice whirled on him, incredulous. "Abernathy, escort this woman out. She's causing a scene." The diners leaned in, the air thick with anticipation. The woman in pearls whispered, "He'll do it, won't he?" But Mr. Abernathy didn't move toward Amara. Instead, he turned to her, his posture softening, and bowed slightly. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "What are your orders?" A murmur rippled through the diners, confusion replacing shock. The young man in the booth grinned faintly, sensing a shift. The older gentleman's brow furrowed, his disapproval now aimed at Beatrice. Beatrice's face paled, her mouth opening, but no words coming. "Sterling?" she stammered, her eyes darting between Amara and Abernathy. "What are you talking about? This is our name." Her voice cracked, the legacy she'd clung to slipping like sand. Amara rose slowly, her movements deliberate, her indigo dress catching the light like a crown. She faced Beatrice, her gaze unyielding, and spoke with a voice that cut through the room's stunned silence. "This was your family's name," Amara said, each word a hammer striking stone. "As of 9 this morning, Sterling Hospitality Group owns the Sterling Room. My name is on the deed." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. The woman in pearls gasped, her companion whispering, "She owns it?" The young man in the booth let out a low whistle, his grin widening. Even the tweed-jacketed gentleman leaned back, his expression shifting to grudging respect. Beatrice staggered, her hand clutching the edge of Amara's table for support. Her eyes, wild with disbelief, searched the room as if it could refute Amara's claim. But the diners' faces, some shocked, some approving, confirmed the truth. Amara continued, her voice steady but laced with steel. "I came to assess my new property, and you've just shown me its greatest flaw, a legacy of exclusion I'll dismantle." The room was a frozen tableau, every eye on Amara. The young waiter, Thomas, stood rooted, his tray forgotten. The woman in pearls whispered, "She's extraordinary." Beatrice's breath came in shallow gasps, her world collapsing under the weight of Amara's words. Mr. Abernathy still bowed slightly, awaited further instruction, his loyalty now clear. Amara's gaze swept the room, lingering on the portrait of Cornelius Lowell, whose painted eyes seemed to dim. The Sterling Room was hers now, and the silence that followed was not defeat. It was the echo of a new beginning. The Sterling Room stood suspended, its golden light dimmed by the weight of Amara Sterling's words. Her revelation, "I am the owner," hung in the air like a guillotine, severing Beatrice Lowell's last claim to her family's legacy. Diners sat frozen, their eyes darting between Amara's commanding figure and Beatrice's trembling form. The woman in pearls whispered, "She owns it?" Her voice a mix of shock and awe. The young man in the corner booth leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if he'd bet on Amara all along. The older gentleman in tweed adjusted his glasses, his earlier disapproval softening into curiosity. The chandeliers flickered, their glow no longer Beatrice's to wield. Beatrice clung to the edge of Amara's table, her knuckles white, her face drained of color. "You can't," she stammered, her voice a broken whisper. "This is our house." But the truth was undeniable, etched in the deed Amara held, and the quiet authority in her gaze. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell loomed above, its painted eyes now irrelevant, a relic of a world that had just crumbled. Amara's voice cut through the silence, steady and unyielding. "It was. Not anymore." She turned to Mr. Abernathy, who stood poised, his silver hair catching the light. "My first order as owner, escort Ms. Lowell out. Her membership is revoked, permanently." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The woman in pearls clutched her companion's arm, murmuring, "She's serious." The young man in the booth nodded, his smile widening. A waiter, Thomas, stood frozen, his tray forgotten, while another server whispered to a colleague, "About time." Mr. Abernathy inclined his head. "Yes, Miss Sterling." His tone was resolute, a 30-year veteran choosing his allegiance. He gestured to two security guards who stepped forward with practiced calm, their black suits blending into the room's shadows. Beatrice recoiled, her eyes wild with disbelief. "Abernathy, you traitor!" she spat, but her voice lacked force, drowned by the weight of her defeat. The guards flanked her, their expressions neutral but firm. "This way, Miss Lowell," one said, his voice low. Beatrice's gaze swept the room, seeking allies, but found none. The older gentleman in tweed looked away, his silence damning. The young couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. Beatrice, once the queen of this domain, was now an outcast in her kingdom. As the guards guided her toward the exit, Beatrice's steps faltered. Her heels dragged against the polished floor, each sound a reminder of her fall. The diners watched, some with pity, others with relief. The woman in pearls whispered, "She brought this on herself." Outside, under the cold glow of a street lamp, Beatrice stopped, turning to peer through the restaurant's tall windows. The golden light bathed the dining room, but it felt distant, untouchable. Diners resumed their meals, their chatter rising as if she'd never existed. Her breath fogged the glass, her reflection a ghost of the woman who'd once ruled this space. The Sterling room had moved on without her. Inside, Amara remained standing, her indigo dress a beacon of authority. She surveyed the room, her eyes lingering on the faces of the diners, some stunned, some approving, all aware of the shift. Mr. Abernathy returned, his expression one of quiet respect. "It's done, Miss Sterling," he said. She nodded, her face composed but her mind racing. The slap still stung her cheek, a reminder of the legacy she was here to dismantle. But it was Beatrice's outburst, rooted in fear and prejudice, that had clarified her mission. The Sterling room would no longer be a fortress of exclusion. A young server, Lila, approached hesitantly, her dark curls framing a nervous smile. "Miss Sterling," she said softly, "thank you for standing up." Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with gratitude. Amara's expression softened, a rare crack in her armor. "This place is changing, Lila," she said, "for all of us." Lila nodded, retreating with a newfound confidence, her tray steadier now. The other servers exchanged glances, a quiet ripple of hope spreading among them. The diners, too, felt the shift. The young man in the booth raised his glass subtly, a silent toast to Amara's victory. Amara sat back down, her posture regal, but her thoughts heavy. The room resumed its rhythm. Clinking glasses, soft laughter. But it was different now, charged with the aftershocks of her triumph. She glanced at the portrait of Cornelius Lowell, its stern gaze no longer a challenge but a relic. The Sterling room was hers, but the weight of ownership pressed against her. She wasn't here to destroy its history. She was here to redefine it, to make it a place where everyone belonged. The sting on her cheek faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. The battle was won, but the war for change was just beginning. Outside, Beatrice stood alone, the street lamp casting her shadow long and thin. The world she'd known had rejected her, and the cold night air offered no comfort. Inside, Amara held court, the new guardian of a legacy she would forge anew. The Sterling room exhaled, its golden light softening as the din of clinking glasses and murmured conversations resumed, a fragile normalcy settling over the diners. Amara Sterling sat alone at her corner table, the indigo of her dress catching the chandelier's glow like a lighthouse in a fading storm. The sting on her cheek had dulled, but its memory lingered, a quiet reminder of the battle she'd just won. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell stared down, its stern gaze now impotent against her presence. Diners stole glances, some curious, some awed, while servers moved with a newfound lightness, as if the air itself had shifted. The young man in the corner booth sipped his wine, his eyes lingering on Amara with quiet respect. The woman in pearls whispered to her companion, her tone softer now, almost reverent. Amara's fingers rested on the table, steady but heavy with the weight of what had transpired. She'd come to assess her new acquisition, but Beatrice Lowell's outburst had laid bare the rot within the Sterling room's legacy, exclusion woven into its very walls. The irony was sharp. Beatrice's prejudice had handed Amara the clarity she needed. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a battleground for change, and she was its new commander. Her mind replayed the moment she'd stood, voice cutting through the silence, claiming ownership. The victory was hers, but the responsibility was heavier still. She wasn't here to erase history. She was here to rewrite it, to make this space a beacon for all. Lila, the young server with dark curls, approached hesitantly, her tray balanced with care. Her eyes bright with nerves met Amara's. "Miss Sterling," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did." She paused, glancing at the other servers, who watched from a distance with cautious hope. "It means something, seeing you stand up like that." Amara's expression softened, a rare warmth breaking through her composed exterior. "This place is ours now, Lila," she said. "All of ours." Lila's smile trembled, and she nodded, retreating with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The other servers exchanged glances, their whispers carrying a spark of possibility. Amara's words had lit a flame, small but growing. She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the ceiling, where the chandeliers cast intricate patterns of light. The room felt different now, less like a fortress and more like a canvas. But the weight of ownership pressed against her chest. She'd faced rooms like this her whole life, spaces that judged her before she spoke, that questioned her right to be there. Each time she'd carved her place with grit and grace. The Sterling Room was no different, yet it was everything. It was her chance to build something new, to prove that luxury didn't have to mean exclusion. The diner's eyes still lingered, but they no longer felt like daggers. They were questions, and she had answers. Amara pulled out her phone, her fingers brushing the screen as she dialed Julian. The line rang once, twice before his warm voice answered. "Amara," he said, a smile audible in his tone. "How's your evening going?" She exhaled, a faint laugh escaping her. "It's been eventful." She paused, her voice steady but tinged with fatigue. "I need you here, Julian. Dinner at my restaurant. I have a story to tell." Julian's chuckle was soft, grounding. "Your restaurant, huh? Sounds like you've already claimed it. I'm on my way." She could picture him, tall with his architect's precision and quiet strength, always her partner, never her savior. Their marriage was a balance, built on respect and shared dreams. He'd be furious about the slap, she knew, but prouder still of how she'd handled it. "You should have seen their faces," she said, her voice warming. "I think I shook their world." Julian's tone turned serious. "You always do. Tell me everything when I get there." Amara smiled, the first real one of the night. "Deal." As she hung up, her eyes swept the room again. The young man in the booth raised his glass subtly, a silent salute. The woman in pearls caught her gaze and offered a small nod, as if acknowledging a shift she hadn't expected. The servers moved with purpose, their steps lighter, as if Amara's victory had lifted a weight from them too. Lila, clearing a nearby table, glanced at Amara with a shy smile, her hands steady now. The Sterling Room was still elegant, still steeped in history, but it felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Amara's fingers traced the edge of her glass, her mind settling. Beatrice's outburst had been a gift, exposing the cracks in a legacy that no longer served its time. Amara wasn't here to tear it down. She was here to rebuild it, to make it a place where Lila could stand tall, where diners like the young man in the booth could feel seen. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell seemed smaller now, its shadow no longer looming. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered, urging Amara forward. She was ready to shape what came next. The Sterling Room glowed softly, its chandeliers casting a warm dawn-like light as the last diners lingered over their desserts. Amara Sterling sat at her corner table, her indigo dress now a symbol of her triumph, though her mind was already on the future. The call to Julian had grounded her, his voice a reminder of the partnership that anchored her through storms. Now, as the room hummed with a tentative, new energy, she felt the weight of her role as owner, not just of a restaurant, but of a legacy she was determined to reshape. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell hung silently, its presence a faint echo of a past she was ready to redefine. The next morning, Amara stood before the staff in the dining room, the tables cleared and the chandeliers dimmed for the meeting. Servers, chefs, and busboys stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. Lila, the young server with dark curls, stood near the front, her eyes bright with anticipation. Mr. Abernathy, his silver hair neat as ever, nodded to Amara, his loyalty unwavering since the night before. The air was crisp, charged with possibility, as if the room itself awaited her words. "Thank you for being here," Amara began, her voice clear and warm, carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her place. "The Sterling Room has a history, beautiful, flawed, and heavy. But history isn't a chain, it's a foundation. We're going to build on it, make this place a home for everyone, not just a select few." Her words were a promise, and the staff leaned in, some nodding, others exchanging glances. Lila's smile widened, her hands clasped tightly. A chef, his apron still dusted with flour, shifted his weight, his skepticism softening. Amara paced slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't about erasing the past," she said. "It's about opening doors. Luxury doesn't mean exclusion. It means excellence, for all who walk through those doors." She gestured toward the entrance, where morning light streamed through the glass. "We'll start with training, customer service that sees every guest as equal. No more unwritten rules, no more whispers." The staff murmured, a ripple of agreement spreading. Mr. Abernathy's eyes shone with pride, while Lila whispered to a colleague, "She means it." Outside, Boston was buzzing. A morning edition of the Boston Herald had hit the stands, its headline bold, "New Owner Shakes Up the Sterling Room." The article praised Amara as a visionary entrepreneur, detailing her acquisition and the dramatic ousting of Beatrice Lowell. But it also noted whispers of discontent from traditionalists, who called her changes a betrayal of heritage. Amara had seen the paper, its words both a validation and a challenge. She knew change would stir resistance, but she was ready. The article's praise fueled her resolve, while its critics reminded her of the work ahead. She turned to Julian, who stood quietly at the room's edge, his architect's eye already sketching possibilities. "Julian," she said, a smile tugging at her lips, "what do you think?" He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This place needs light, literally. Bigger windows, maybe a skylight. Let the world see what you're building." The staff chuckled, the tension easing. Amara nodded, envisioning the change. Sunlight flooding the mahogany walls, softening the stern gaze of Cornelius Lowell's portrait. "We'll keep the elegance," she said, "but make it breathe." A server raised a hand, hesitant. "Miss Sterling, will we keep our jobs?" The question hung heavy, voicing the fear in many eyes. Amara's expression softened. "You're the heart of this place," she said. "Your jobs are safe, but your roles will grow. You'll be part of something bigger." The server exhaled, and Lila's eyes sparkled, her earlier gratitude now a quiet fire. The staff stood taller, their doubt giving way to purpose. Amara walked to the center of the room, her voice rising with conviction. "The Sterling Room will remain a legend, but it will be our legend. Yours, mine, every guest who walks in. No one will feel out of place here again." The words landed like a vow, and the staff erupted in soft applause. Lila clapped hardest, her curls bouncing, while Mr. Abernathy's nod carried the weight of decades. Even the skeptical chef cracked a smile, his arms uncrossing. As the meeting ended, Amara lingered, her eyes tracing the room's familiar lines. The chandeliers, the polished tables, the portrait now just a piece of decor. The Herald article lay folded on a table, its headline a beacon of her intent. Julian approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing it," he said softly, "changing the world, one room at a time." Amara leaned into his touch, her resolve unshaken. The Sterling Room was no longer a fortress. It was a beginning, and she was ready to lead it into the light. The Sterling Room shimmered with a new vitality, its chandelier light softened by the late evening glow filtering through newly widened windows. Amara Sterling sat at the same corner table where her battle had begun, her indigo dress now a quiet emblem of her victory. The air felt lighter, as if the restaurant had shed the weight of its old exclusivity. The staff moved with purpose, their smiles genuine, and the diners, once a monolith of old money, now included faces that mirrored Boston's diversity. Amara's vision, shared just days ago with her team, was taking root, and the room hummed with the promise of a new era. Julian sat across from her, his architect's eye scanning the space with a warm smile. "You've already changed it," he said, his voice low, laced with pride. "It feels alive." Amara's lips curved, her first unguarded smile of the night. "It's a start," she replied, her gaze sweeping the room. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell still hung above the fireplace, but its stern presence felt diminished, a relic overshadowed by the laughter and chatter filling the space. The Boston Herald article, folded in her purse, had called her a visionary, but also stirred murmurs of resistance from traditionalists. Those voices, though, were drowned out by the scene before her, a restaurant reborn. At a nearby table, a family of four laughed over their meal, their voices a vibrant tapestry of accents. The father, in a neat sweater, pointed at the menu, explaining a dish to his daughter, whose braided hair bounced as she giggled. Her mother, in a colorful headscarf, smiled warmly, while her brother sketched on a napkin, his eyes bright with curiosity. Their presence was a quiet triumph, a stark contrast to the room's once rigid exclusivity. Amara watched them, her heart swelling. This was what she'd fought for, a place where a family like this could feel at home, not scrutinized. Lila, the young server, approached their table, her dark curls framing a confident smile. "Miss Sterling, Mr. Julian," she said, setting down plates of roasted duck and herb-crusted salmon. "Compliments of the chef. He's trying your new menu suggestions." Amara nodded, her eyes meeting Lila's. "Tell him it looks perfect." Lila beamed, her earlier gratitude now a steady glow. As she moved away, Amara noticed the other servers. Thomas, the nervous waiter from that fateful night, now carried his tray with ease. The staff had embraced her vision, their steps lighter, their service warmer. Julian raised his glass, the red wine catching the light. "To you," he said, his voice soft but firm, "for taking this place and making it yours." Amara clinked her glass against his, her smile deepening. "To us," she corrected. "You're part of this, Julian." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm just the guy who'll design the skylight. You're the one changing history." Their laughter mingled, a rare moment of ease after days of upheaval. Amara leaned back, savoring the warmth of his presence. Their partnership was her anchor, built on mutual respect, not rescue. The family at the nearby table caught her eye again. The daughter, no older than 10, pointed at a dessert on the menu, her voice carrying. "Can we try that one, Mama?" Her mother laughed, nodding, and the father flagged Lila down with a grin. Their joy was infectious, drawing smiles from nearby diners. A young couple sharing a bottle of wine, an older man dining alone who looked up from his book with a soft chuckle. The Sterling Room was no longer a fortress. It was a gathering place, its elegance now inviting rather than imposing. Amara's thoughts drifted to the night of the confrontation, the sting of Beatrice's slap a distant memory. That moment had been a crucible, forging her resolve. The Herald article had sparked debate, but the faces around her, Lila's, the family's, even the older man's, were proof her vision was right. She wasn't erasing the Sterling Room's history. She was expanding it, making it a legacy for all. The portrait of Cornelius Lowell seemed to fade further, its shadow no longer reaching her table. "Miss Sterling," Mr. Abernathy said, approaching with his quiet dignity, "the staff wanted you to know. The new training program starts tomorrow. They're eager." His eyes crinkled, a rare warmth from the man who'd served this place for decades. Amara nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. We're building something special." He bowed slightly, his loyalty a bridge between the old and new. As Julian and Amara finished their meal, the family nearby stood to leave, the daughter clutching a small dessert box, her smile radiant. They passed Amara's table, and the mother met her gaze, offering a nod of quiet gratitude. Amara returned it, her heart full. The Sterling Room was hers now, not just in name, but in spirit. She raised her glass again, this time to herself, to the family, to everyone who'd walked through these doors. The new era had begun, and it shone brighter than any chandelier. The Sterling Room glowed anew, its chandeliers casting light on a future unshackled from its past. Amara Sterling had transformed not just a restaurant, but a legacy, proving that power lies in inclusion, not exclusion. Her victory was a spark, igniting hope in those who'd felt unseen. What did this story stir in you? Did Amara's resolve inspire, or did Beatrice's fall resonate? Share your thoughts below. Where are you listening from, and what moved you most? Your voice matters just as every guest now matters at the Sterling Room. Thank you for joining this journey, for letting these characters live in your imagination. Stay with us for more stories of triumph and transformation. We'll meet again soon, under new lights, in new rooms.